Dan and in for Amy this morning. Kristen McQuarrie from the Chicago Tribune Ed Board. And Kristen, I was looking at Instagram because I like to post photos of myself in my bikini when I'm poolside on Instagram, like the kids do.
And your dessert, whatever your great food item was today, you plate your pictures.
I've seen it. All the selfies.
Yep.
A lot
when you
of
get
them,
a manicure, sometimes you post that too.
A lot of them provocative, right? Living the life of leisure as I do. And what I saw is that embargoed until 10 p.m. tonight is the first ever interview from prison of one disgraced former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich. This conducted by Chicago Magazine, not released yet, going to be released at 10 p.m. tonight. And so I asked the question, do you think it's likely to be a blockbuster or a nothing burger? Hint, the latter. We'll take your calls, 312-642-5600, turnkey.pro answer line, 64636DA, turnkey.pro text line. I put that question to you, Miss McQuarrie of the Chicago Tribune.
Well, as you mentioned, it's embargoed, and in newsy speak, that means I'm not allowed to speak of it. I think Chicago Magazine teamed with a local television station, and so they want to give the 10 o'clock news kind of the first crack at this interview. But I have read it. I wrote an editorial off of it that also will post at 10 p.m. tonight.
Oh, another.
Yeah.
Will that be a blockbuster or a nothing burger?
It will be a blockbuster.
All right. Blockbuster editorial. Jury's still out on the Blago interview.
Yes, it is the first time that he has been interviewed since he was incarcerated 5.5 years ago. And
do we find out how his Shakespeare classes are going?
You know, he's very much the same person. I just think it's a story again about...
How's the hair?
You know, I don't know.
No pictures?
Well, I don't want to say.
Okay, all right. I don't want to get you in trouble.
Yeah.
I don't want you to
they were
break
already,
the fourth wall of journalistic ethics.
I know. I don't want to walk out of here.
Yeah, right.
Fired. But there were already photos of him posted. That was, I think, posted on Instagram. Or was it The Inquirer? I think it was The Inquirer a couple of years ago. Somebody had a stolen cell phone in prison, and they got a couple pictures of him with his all-white hair. So it's, to me... I know I'm not supposed to be intrigued with his story, but I am. I covered him pretty extensively from the first time he ran. You were involved in the Republican side of that race.
Yes.
I interviewed him many times. I've been to his home. I've interviewed his family. And I know this is strange, but on the day that he was arrested, I, as a taxpayer, felt almost personally just stunned, first of all, because he had been under federal investigation for 4 or 5 years, but there was appeared to be no smoking gun until the feds went in that fall, you'll recall, and wiretapped his house. So I just think he's an interesting story in that there are a lot of people who still believe him, that he was only participating in regular horse trading, that it was not criminal, and that he was used as an example and put away for 14 years when there are politicians out there doing the same thing and getting away with it. There are some people who think that.
Yeah, well, they weren't on the jury. So that's the big problem for him, number one. Number two, I mean, that is a very insular minority that thinks he did nothing wrong. They may think, there may be a number of people who think the sentence was too harsh. There are certainly those people. We've had this conversation on this show before, because Amy Jacobson is one of them, of course, but and wants his sentence commuted by President Trump or just like she did President Obama's. Ridiculous. But that's different than thinking he did nothing wrong.
Amy's not here to defend herself.
Well, I would say this. I have said the same thing here, so it's no surprise. But I mean, here but I don't think there's very many people that think he did nothing wrong or that he wasn't guilty of breaking the law. But this whole interview and I guess some of the build up to it, question mark, is it's like the book. Remember, the book was going to be a tell-all.
I have the book. I have it right here.
Oh, boy.
The Governor.
There's a lot of dust on that.
He wrote this in 2009. Governor Blagojevich.
That was going to be a blockbuster. That was going to be a tell-all. He's not going down alone. He's taking the Chicago Democrat establishment with...
Yeah, he didn't really.
Yawn.
So he wrote this book, though, after his arrest, but before his first trial. And he does call out other politicians in here who have pretty glaring conflicts of interest in Springfield, but we're sort of used to that now. I still just find it stunning that after George Ryan, after we had a governor who literally leveraged any aspect of state government he could to enrich himself, to enrich his friends, through leases, through cash, through contracts. That entire election in 2002 was based on ethics and trust. That is what they all ran on.
Now, wait a second.
He turned around.
George Ryan didn't enrich himself. It was just that every time he reached into his pocket, the money was there, and he didn't know how it got there.
It was like magic beans.
That's different.
Yeah, he never used an ATM, but he always had wads of cash. Came up in his route.
He was a fortunate son until he wasn't.
But so then to have this next governor turn around, and within months, pay-to-play allegations arose, as you'll recall, from his father-in-law, Dick Mell, at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then to hear
a good government guy, Dick Mell.
Oh, he's a goo-goo.
He's not slime.
Well, let's not call him slime, but then
he's not corrupt. He's not conflicted. He's not part of the corrupt Chicago political machine for 40 years.
So then until 2008, you learn through the wiretaps all of the finagling that Blagojevich was doing. They were deeply in debt. They had rung up $200,000 in consumer debt.
And that's even with Patty with a no-show job with Tony Resco.
She was subpoenaed at one point, but never was accused of wrongdoing for her work with Resco. But between the time he was elected governor and the time he was arrested, they spent $400,000 on clothing for themselves. So that was all introduced at trial as to why he was trying to leverage things for himself and his family. But I thought I've heard you say before, Dan, that you also have had questions about this case because the prosecutors did not allow the furtherance of the act.
With the sale, the quote-unquote sale, the Senate seat.
Yes.
Absolutely, I have said that. Absolutely. Patrick Fitzgerald, there's never been a full accounting, not accounting to my satisfaction. If you have buyer and seller on surveillance, if you've got them dead to rights, then you allow the transaction to move forward so you get both buyer and seller. Why not get buyer too? And if you believe the buyer was Jesse Jackson Jr., which some have suggested, then, ultimately he was got by other means, but that doesn't excuse the lack of getting buyer and seller at the time. If Lincoln was rolling over in his grave, as Patrick Fitzgerald famously proclaimed, then why not get buyer and seller? Why limit the prosecution to just seller? Got a problem with that. Got a problem with the failure to release all of the tapes from the surveillance, including conversations between Tiny Dancer and Blagojevich. Mm-hmm. By the way, the good news, though, is from all this prosecution, his conviction, his stiff sentence, is that pay to play is over until I read this Tribune story over the weekend that Tiny Dancer, with the election a year and a half away, his mayoral reelection, collected $3.1 million in high-dollar contributions. $2.1 million of it, 70%, has come from 83 donors who have benefited from actions at City Hall. In other words, law firms seeking approval for their clients' projects or bond business for themselves, and so on and so forth. City contractors prohibited, but by other means, he's still getting the pay-to-play cash. So nothing has changed, even with that stiff sentence.
I know. That's what I'm saying. Why do you think donors give money? This whole idea that they're just getting access and all that.
Not all.
Not all. I mean, not all. Not all. But this is why we have a problem in this state, and maybe it's everywhere. But I think there is a case to be made as to what Rod Blagojevich did. There was no furtherance of the act. He was having conversations in his living room like a lunatic that he was.
But here's the thing about I assume this interview won't cover it. The issues that I raise. Rod Blagojevich could answer questions about conversations he had with Tiny Dancer or Mike Madigan or anybody else. And the problem is the lefties at Chicago Magazine or the Bouvier sisters at NBC5, I'm sure won't ask him if they did the interview. But they'll just ask him, what's it like? Oh, your hair's white. And other probing questions. How's Patty doing? How are the girls doing? What's the... because, of course, they were proponents of Rod Blagojevich. All the people that are interviewing him were proponents of Rod Blagojevich because they're all left Democrats, which is the entire town, at least the Chicago Press Corps and the Springfield Press Corps for that matter. You and Cass excluded, but, you know what I'm saying. So they're not going to get but Blagojevich can volunteer this information. So for all of those rushing to defend Blagojevich, you know what? I would be a little bit more empathetic. Have a little bit more empathy for him. I have empathy for his daughters who are, innocent in this whole saga. The sins of the parents, right? DACA. But
You just can't escape it.
I would have more empathy for him if he would disclose on some of these other people, if he regretted what he was a part of and wanted to do something about it, but he doesn't.
No, he doesn't. And he, like we were talking about, I mean, he wrote this book in 2009. He does talk about phone calls between himself and Rahm Emanuel. They wanted Valerie Jarrett. There was all kinds of people who were horse trading. Dick Durbin was trying to get him.
He was bad at it.
Who? Blagojevich?
Yeah.
Right. I know. I don't believe his sentence should be commuted. It does strike me as a particularly long sentence when he never actually got the money, when there wasn't the transaction. And you've had on your show before Robert Blagojevich, his brother,
yes,
who was charged,
that was wrong,
dragged through a trial, not even acquitted. It was a hung jury, and prosecutors chose not to try him a second time like they did his brother. Robert
Blagojevich, that was just being punitive to try and squeeze him to testify against his brother. That was a political prosecution. That was wrong. But these crocodile tears for Rod Blagojevich, the crimes he went to prison for are a fraction of the crimes he committed against Illinois families as governor. I mean, go back and read all of the charges in his impeachment. Remember, he was impeached? Yeah, the top line is corruption, but illegally expanding the Medicaid program to use that as a slush fund to try and generate political loyalty from middle-income families by putting them on the dole and so on and so forth. This guy abused the state. He exacerbated all the problems we have that have just metastasized in the intervening decade. So you just, pull back a little bit. And if you're having pangs of concern for Rod Blagojevich, review the record, I would suggest. Sue on the South Side, you're on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Oh, hi, guys. I'm listening to you. I'm just reminded of the corruption, and it's so disgusting. But my comment was also, in addition to that, what a day to put Rod Blagojevich in an interview on 9/11. We're all kind of saying reverence of what happened, and to have that interview on 9/11, I just think it's like almost an insult, offensive. That's my comment.
Poor taste, yeah. Thanks for the call, Sue. Yeah, I mean, okay. Sean from Elmwood Park.
Prof, it's not that he did nothing wrong. That's not the case at all. It is that it's all wrong, and you're witnessing selective prosecution.
Well, everything is selective prosecution.
Well, but the whole system, you're condemning Rod, and rightfully so. But what about Adam Kinzinger front-running votes, buying stock, making a fortune? What about Louis Gutierrez paying his wife $400,000 to pick out his socks? It's all wrong. It's all corruption. It's all misappropriation of fund, and it's all a scam. And it's all about money. It's all about money laundering. And then what they're doing is they're using their power to extort money from people who want to operate in business. And what you get to do is if you get out of line, see, that's what Rod Blagojevich's real sin was. He was about to beef on Obama and his father-in-law, Silky G. That's what he was going to do. And he got put in a cooler for 14 years so that when he gets out, his hair is white and nobody cares what he has to say anymore because they're all in an old people's home. And it worked.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the call, Sean. I mean, I'll tell you what, that seems to me, Sean's getting to something that, Blagojevich's entire desire of his political career was relevance, being in the spotlight, and to some extent Patty too, thus the reality TV shows and all this nonsense during his indictment and trial. And that's what they lost. They're completely irrelevant.
What a price to pay for what?
Before you see it on